Otis Alexander is a lead cybersecurity engineer at MITRE. He's been working to adapt their attack framework to ICS and ICS adversaries. Please welcome Otis to the S4 Main Stage.
This is David Bianco's Pyramid of Pain, and it's a categorization of indicators of compromise. And we could think about this from two different standpoints. From the defender standpoint, we could think about how easy it is to integrate hash values or IP addresses into our existing tools, and how easy it is to collect them. It's fairly easy. But on the other side of the spectrum, in terms of tactics, techniques, and procedures, or TTP, it may be a little bit more difficult in order to collect these and integrate them with our tools. From the standpoint of an adversary, it's easy to take our malware, obfuscate it, create a new hash value, and it's relatively low cost in order to get new IPs. But on the other side of the spectrum, TTP are associated with our behavior, and they're sticky. So to try to change your TTP means that you have to change your behavior as an adversary, and that's a little bit more difficult. And that's where the attack for enterprise focuses, or attack model in general, and it stands for Adversary Tactics, Techniques, and Common Knowledge. And ATT&CK is a knowledge base of adversary tactics and techniques. It was developed by MITRE, and it's based on real-world observations of adversaries' operations. So this is the technique matrix for attack for enterprise. What you'll notice is at the top, there's tactics, which are adversary technical goals. And these range all the way from initial access to command and control. Techniques are associated with the tactics, and it's how an adversary gets a goal accomplished. So if you take one particular technique, this one's scheduled task, the page will have a description of the actual technique, and it'll also have procedures or examples of how adversaries have actually implemented this technique in the real world. There's 4 points about attack for enterprise that you should keep in mind. So it's grounded in real data from cyber incidents. It enables pivoting between red teams and blue teams, so it acts as a common lexicon for them to speak in. And it decouples the problem from the solution. So we describe adversary behavior in the form of TTP, but we don't recommend any particular solutions. And it transforms our thinking from thinking about boundaries or firewalls and protections like that to focusing on post-exploit adversary behavior. What are adversaries doing once they're actually in the network? So I've led the development of attack for ICS for a number of years now, and we created this model really to think about what adversaries in this area are doing. So adversaries' motives, objectives, and intents are different when they're attacking industrial control systems. And this is just based on the different systems that we're dealing with. There's also different phases to the life cycle of attack, so there's different choices that an adversary can make. The technologies are different as well, so how an adversary interacts with the system is different. And then thinking from a defender standpoint, there's platform dependencies. We have to think about data collection, especially at the lowest levels of industrial control systems. How do we get the information or data sources we want from maybe a controller? Mitigations is something also that we have to think about. So we don't want to recommend mitigations that go against safety concerns or availability constraints. So this slide really highlights what our focus is in terms of attack for ICS. Just to give you a little background, when we look at an incident, we break it down first with the enterprise attack model, and we go as far as we can with that model in order to describe the TTP of the adversary. And then around level 2, thinking about this as a functional reference architecture, we have various specialized platforms or applications and specialized protocols. And that's when enterprise attack can't really describe the behavior of the adversary, and that's when attack for ICS really kicks in. We focus on levels 0 through 2 of the Purdue Model. So this is the technique matrix for attack for ICS. And what you'll notice is a couple of tactic categories are highlighted, and that's to show that we've added something new to the model. So operator evasion is one tactic category that we added. And operator evasion talks about how we fool adversary into thinking, or operator into thinking everything's okay with the system, or get them to perform a wrong action. Then we have disruption and destruction, and this really categorizes the main goals of adversaries in the systems. They're trying to affect the physical process. So disruption is how do we stop or degrade the physical process. Destruction is how do we destroy equipment or cause catastrophic failure. There's some other things that we really honed in on with this attack model. For instance, the persistence category. We try to really think about what's going on with embedded systems, those low-level controllers in industrial control systems. So adversaries may target the firmware on those devices. They may modify control logic. Something that they also may do is modify firmware on a module connected to a controller. We also look at discovery tactic category, and this is just the adversary getting a lay of the land, trying to figure out what's on the network. So there's a number of techniques in here that we've added in order to describe what an adversary is doing to get a lay of the land. For instance, control process. What control process am I trying to affect? What are the different channels going back and forth? Role identification. Is this device a master? Is it an outstation? Is it a safety instrumented system? And then certain things in terms of serial. So we may have a device, but there may be a whole world of other devices behind it. So how do we enumerate those connections? So we try to think broadly about what adversaries in this area have done and what they need in order to accomplish their ultimate goals. So this is one use case for the visualization of the technique matrix, and we can think about a couple things we can do with this. So for instance, if you're in a particular industry, you may be interested in one particular incident and you want to break it down in a visual manner so that you understand what went on in the attack. It's a way of quickly understanding what the adversary has done. Also, there may be a number of incidents that are applicable to your particular domain, say electric power, that you want to look at. And you can do a heat map to understand what are the most popular techniques being used in the wild. And this could be a scoping mechanism. You may not be able to cover everything initially in terms of TTP and integrate the behavior into your tools, but you may be able to scope down on the most popular techniques in order to have a place to start. And that's a couple of use cases that we have for the technique matrix. So if you're familiar with any of the earlier charts that we had or slides that showed the attack model for ICS at an early stage, it was a lot bigger. And the reason why we did this is because we were trying to include enterprise attacks there. Because as you know, Windows techniques, Linux techniques are all applicable to the area. But as we started to work with the model, enterprise attacks started to move faster and faster, and we thought it would be a better idea to just reference what they were doing instead of including it all in one model. So this is just a representation of how we use the two models and how we tie them together to think about the interfaces that the adversary has to move through and their actions within enterprise or IT systems before they go to ICS. So this is the other side of it once they pivot down into the attack model for ICS to their ultimate goal. And we think that it's very important to work together with enterprise attack to describe adversary behavior, because for a lot of attacks, they're coming through traditional IT systems or they're working with traditional IT systems. And this gives us a full picture of what's going on. So one of the activities that we like to do in lab environments is adversary emulation. So we have labs in MITRE, we have labs with our partners, and we simulate different ICS systems in different domains. So we perform adversary emulation, which is threat-based red teaming. And what it allows us to do is emulate techniques that an adversary that's most likely to target our environment would conduct. And a very important aspect to this is it allows us to think about the technique and the behavior behind the technique instead of a specific implementation. So looking at the chart here, we could also see that there's different ways in order to get to our final goal. So in our testbed environment, we can explore multiple ways of getting to something like exfiltration or command and control or disruption and destruction. So just as an example, when crash override came out, we did a decomposition of it using the attack model. So doing that is powerful because we're able to think about crash override and its payloads in an abstract manner. We're not tied to the malware anymore. And in this case, we're able to implement it, one of the payloads, in OpenDMP3 because it's relevant to US substations. So doing that, we're able to run that on our testbed environment and see what the effects are there and monitor it. And this decomposition allows the red team and blue teams to work together seamlessly, and we call it a purple team. And the red team can kind of either plan their activities based on the technique matrix and all the techniques that we have, or they can track it as they're going along. And then they can share that with the blue team, and the blue team can use that to think about what they need to do better in terms of their activities. So this is a example of what I'm talking about. It's a coverage matrix. So you can think about this as initially the red team provides this technique matrix highlighted with the activities that they're going to do to the blue team. And the blue team can go through, and as they're working or afterwards, they can highlight and show what they have confidence in coverage of. So we can show that maybe for certain techniques we have low confidence that we can detect them, but some other ones that we have high confidence. And then we can kind of focus on the ones that we have low confidence in and develop analytics or detection mechanisms to bring those up to the level that we're confident that we can detect them. So this is a very valuable tool as a lot of red teams and blue teams don't communicate properly. It's also a good tool in terms of disseminating the results of certain exercises. So on the ICS side, we're kind of limited in terms of incidents that we can draw upon to kind of mature the model or think about additional scenarios that we can perform in a testbed environment. So one thing we've utilized are failure scenarios, and we decompose these into use cases, and I'll talk a bit about that. So failure scenarios include malicious and non-malicious cybersecurity events, and these could be data integrity attacks, it could be human error, equipment failures, any fault or problem that you could think of within a particular domain that can cause a failure of the control process. So these are very useful to us in our activities for adversary emulation. It could be a starting point for us to think about what we want to do next, but they're also useful for utilities. So two of the main ways that we use these, especially in conjunction with utilities, are tabletop exercises. So if we need something to start off with in terms of our tabletop exercise, we'll come up with a failure scenario. We'll generate one, and we'll have multiple ones that we'll go through the exercise to see how the utility would respond to an incident related to this failure scenario. We also use them in security testing. So like I said before, we do a lot of work in the lab, and this may be the beginning point of what we're trying to target as a red team. So we have a number of methods of generating failure scenarios. One of the ones I really like is looking at incident data related to utilities reporting incidents to regulatory authorities. So this is the narrative of one of the incidents that I picked up related to oil and gas. So I'll just go through this really quick. A gas utility received notification from field techs that doing routine maintenance of an over-odorized condition. So when you're thinking about a city gate station that's connected to distribution, that's where odorant is added to the gas so that you could detect a leak if there's something going on. So in a under-odorized condition, you may not detect when leaks are happening. In an over-odorized condition, though, you may detect leaks, or you think you detect leaks just because you smell the gas. So here, the ultimate problem was there was a false high flow signal coming from a malfunctioning computer, and it resulted in over-injection of odorant into the distribution system. And this resulted in 610 leak complaints. And a big issue with this is the personnel have to respond to these leak complaints. So you can think that this is a huge tax on their resources at any point in time. So this is a good starting point, and I highlighted key things that I would be looking for in terms of a failure scenario. So the first thing is it's a high flow signal coming from a malfunctioning computer, meaning that this could be caused via cyber. So just to get a full picture of what we would do in terms of conducting adversary emulation or starting a tabletop exercise, we break this out into consequences, failure modes, and causes. So the consequence is we have 610 leak complaints that we have to respond to as a utility. The failure mode is that we have over-odorization of gas, and the cause is a false high signal. So in order to understand what we have to do in terms of adversary emulation and connecting it back up to the attack model for ICS, now we start to think about specific techniques that we can use in order to accomplish the cause. So I have a number of them listed there. And these could be starting points for us to think about how we would get the ultimate consequence. And then you can imagine below that we have more and more techniques that are initial vectors for the adversary to move through to get to this specific point. But this has been very helpful for us to think about what potentially can happen in specific domains and to connect the real consequences for domains up to the attack model for ICS. So another activity that we are in the middle of is thinking about host-based data sources. And I've heard this mentioned on the stage, I think yesterday. But there's so much diversity in the low devices, the controllers, and there's a wealth of data on them. So what we want to do is look and try to identify host-based data sources. And the reason why we're doing this, particularly in regards to the attack model for ICS, is because the attack model for enterprise has data sources associated with every technique. And you can imagine that's fairly simple when you're thinking about Windows systems, especially thinking about host-based data, because there's mechanisms for us to collect logs. Same with Linux systems or Mac systems. So what we wanted to do here is think about what valuable sources of information we have at the lowest ends of our industrial control systems. When you talk to a lot of vendors, their main data source is the network. So they'll say, connect this up to the span port. And that's a great place to start, and you should be monitoring that area. But what else are you missing if you're not looking at the low-level devices? So what are the host-based logs housed on embedded OT devices such as an IED? And then things like asset management data associated with equipment under control. Can that be utilized to understand what's going on with our network or with our industrial control system? So we have to contextualize these data sources and think about how they can help us in terms of security. And then we have to explore potential negative impacts that may happen based on collection of this data. So what we did was we took the devices that we have at MITRE, We took devices that we have at our partners' sites and their test beds, and we just scoured them to look to see what is available via their interfaces, their built-in interfaces in terms of data sources. And we came up with some high-level categories of data that we saw. So configuration data, firmware versions, control logic, various parameters that are set on the device, performance and statistics. So how's the CPU operating? How much memory is being used? Network connection information like netstat. Process information associated with I/O values. Also, any faults or alarms that may have been triggered, and process quality. And then an interesting one is asset management data. So a lot of people use condition-based monitoring or predictive maintenance, and this gives us a clue into what's going on with the piece of equipment at any point in time. Is it overheating? Is it spinning too fast? And if that information is collected at a central repository, we want to collect that too, because that could be a different view into the system that we may not otherwise have. And then there's also physical information that we can gain about a particular device. Was it opened? Was it moved? So these physical sensors can also give us a clue as to whether or not there was something that happened with physical security. So one of the big activities that we had to do here is we had to assess the impacts to industrial communications. And there's fears about actually touching the devices, actively polling them, scanning networks. A lot of people have negative stories about performing these actions on particular devices. So that's understandable because there's timing requirements we have to think about, availability and integrity of communication has to be thought about, and then actual safety concerns. So we don't want to negatively affect the process. But a lot of these stories are anecdotal. So what we want to do is define metrics and a test platform that we could use to explore the impacts while we're actually actively polling these devices. So what we did was we used OpenDMP3 and we instrumented it to look at specific metrics that dealt with the integrity of a packet coming in at any point in time. It also tracks the latency of packets full round trip. So by doing this, we can visualize what's going on at any point in time while we're actively polling the device. And we can also pull data afterwards so that we can go through it to understand what's going on with the industrial communications. So this is one way that you could potentially monitor that impact, and it would be something that I would recommend doing before you have an incident or you have to do something to the device in terms of pulling data from it. I think it's a good empirical way of determining what the impacts to that system may be. So currently, we're in a review process for ATT&CK for ICS. So you won't see it on attack.mitre.org right now because it hasn't been publicly released. And the reason why we're doing that is because we want the community to kind of weigh in on it, to give us their opinions or content or feedback. So that's what we're kind of looking for. We're reaching out to government, national labs, vendors, red teams, utilities, the broad ICS community, and we're asking for you to provide feedback and content. So by feedback, I'm talking about our groupings of techniques. Do they make sense to you? Would you recommend something else? When you go through an incident report, would you have mapped a particular incident differently to a different technique or something like that? And in terms of content, if you have content that's not there in the actual model and you think that you could share, either sanitize or generalize in some manner, that will really help us to mature the model. So after we fill out a little bit of paperwork, we're willing to provide secure access to the wiki and during the review period, and we will just be collecting and incorporating the feedback from the participants. And then that'll allow us to begin the public release process so that you'll see it on attack.mitre.org like the other models. So we're really looking for help from the experts, the people who are doing this every day, who are looking at incidents in their environments, because that will really help to mature the model. So these are our contacts. This is some other information or efforts that are associated with ATT&CK. Please take my information down, email me, and I'll be around. So if you have any questions, let me know. Thank you.